Hi, and welcome to the Crux podcast. This is episode 4, and we're talking inbound versus outbound. Well, before I start, I wanted to say thank you. I literally thought I'd put this up, and my mother and maybe one other person would listen to it, and been very pleased to see the amount of people who've been consuming it. Also, I really appreciate everybody's feedback, everybody's positive well wishes, and couldn't have done it without all those people supporting me, and just really great to see that people are excited about it and enjoying what they hear. So if you have ideas or wishes of what you want to hear about, please keep them coming, and I'll do my part too to keep these coming. And thanks again for being part of the Crux podcast. So before I go into inbound versus outbound, I just wanted to remind people that I'm talking really about concepts still. We'll get into deeper details about account-based marketing and ICP and all these things that become part of what shapes inbound versus outbound plans, or both. And if, again, my comment is, if you don't understand the concepts and really get a sense of what you're tackling in each and or both, it really, you have to take a pause and stop before you proceed, and you're just going to go down the wrong road or be misdirected, and then you miss a chance to actually get off on the right foot with your company. Of course, if you're already in this, then it is a good exercise as well to sort of hit the pause button and reevaluate where your priorities are. But one thing also I wanted to mention is, notice how in the title I didn't say inbound marketing versus outbound marketing. This is as much as about sales as it is about marketing. So I'm talking as a salesman, I'm talking as a marketer, and executives or whoever's listening to this can think about this in generalities of how it affects your entire sales and marketing operation and how you interact with the customer. So foreshadowing to the end, I really want people as they listen to this to understand that I want people not to miss undiscovered demand. These exercises that I have at the end are to make sure that when you're considering your tactics and you're considering your setup, the whole goal is to not become complacent and to not miss demand for your product. So let's start with tactics, just to make sure people understand the construct here. So inbound, we're talking about things like SEO, Google AdWords, pay-per-click, programmatic ads, display, social media, which I'll caution and say that is a complement, not essentially a pure tactic. That's a topic for a whole other episode. Outbound, we're talking about email, telemarketing, direct mail, and I'm going to include a new one really for some people, which is social selling. So using LinkedIn as a true way to connect with an audience. It's a little controversial. Some people are annoyed by it, but it is an important way to actually go outbound to prospects and start a conversation and maintain a conversation potentially, mixed with your general social media tactics. So I'm leaving events out of this discussion because it's just this whole other animal, and it's somewhat not related, but I'm sure there'll be a future podcast on events and how to have a winning strategy there. So drilling down into inbound, so getting a little deeper here. Inbound is, again, handling interest in your company through ways that people land on your site or come inbound to your company, and then allow engagement to happen from there. Inbound is extremely popular. You can thank HubSpot and other inbound mavens who have made it popular to a fault, I would say. It's very fruitful to prioritize your efforts in this area. People love it. It feels better to know that the client reached out to you. But I will say you just have to be careful not to only embrace inbound. And it really is dangerous to overly prioritize this. The way I'll position it is, it's slow to scale, and it may not even scale, period. And you might find yourself asked to change directions or to consider a different strategy. And then if you're too concentrated on inbound, it could lead to difficulties related to the slowness to sort of turn around the battleship. But positives, it is directly related to your brand building. It is a great way to have people immediately see the message of what your company's about, what your product's about. It is really worth the effort to set up and control your brand, your voice, the user experience, as I discussed with Chris Bryce, by taking time and effort into this. And it also leads to easier qualification, an easier sales process. You have a chance to talk to people or engage with people who are already more open because they reach out to you. What's also nice about it is it's usually a steady flow. Unless you have a big announcement or a big campaign going on, inbound can kind of be looked at as this steady faucet if you've done things right. You just have to make sure that you have your process down to not miss anything or be late to respond. So the edge of the other side of the sword, or the double-edged sword, is that it can have a negative effect if you don't have your inbound game nailed down. If someone says, please have someone call me, if they raise their hand, if they want to hear more and no one gets back to them, or the response is poor, it actually kind of becomes this weird double standard where they then become turned off. Like, how hard do I have to try to find out something about your company? So have an inbound response process in place that anybody can follow. There's even ways to do conversational marketing and chatbots to cover it if you don't have a lot of staff. So intercom, drift, all sorts of ways to look at it. So really, it's easier said than done, but there's no excuse to have that negative effect show up. So, just look into that part of the plan. Another, two more positives. It forces you to keep your content fresh. It tells you what's working because people are interacting with different parts of your site. They're interacting with different campaigns. Google AdWords will tell you which topics resonate the best. It also will inform you about the why. So sometimes it can help you understand which part of your value proposition actually resonated the most. Now, the caveat is hopefully you're paying attention. So whoever owns the product marketing hat, someone on the marketing team, salespeople, find out what worked well with someone who came inbound. Don't just skip straight to the sale. What brought you here today? What made you interested in company X? So definitely make sure to leverage that positive so it can be magnified. So negatives about inbound, I will say that the biggest thing that concerns me about inbound when I had advised companies is it's hard to scale. If you really get the game dialed in, your website is getting good views on premise, your Google AdWords are really locked in, well, then what? If you're making your goal, then it's okay, but at the same time, you can't then go, okay, great, I'll do twice as much inbound. I mean, it's something you have to just be careful to make sure you're not solely relying on, so that if you had to scale, if someone said, I need you to do twice as much in this home stretch here, that you're not caught on your heels. The other thing that I've definitely noticed, because everybody's sort of lulled into this advanced cutting edge stuff, is inbound has this, all the algorithms, all the data, and the AI. So hearing AI has gotten to the point where most conversations I have of it are people rolling their eyes or shaking their head at it. And machine learning and all this stuff is great, but it basically just becomes another sort of like hope for automation to work and to take away the effort out of getting people to have demand for your product, or at least the effort to discover the demand. So be very wary of having inbound be too tied to automation or to AI, because sometimes too, if it's not working, if you bought the wrong tech, you have to figure out your own human way to hack your way back to the goals you're going to make. And really in that regard, I think it lulls a lot of people into complacency. I came from a world where people would order leads a lot because their inbound was pushed so hard that they're like, this is going to work, theoretically it's going to work, and then all of a sudden they needed 1,000 more leads to actually get to their goal, and that complacency leads then to real, critical crises that kind of puts everybody on the defensive, and then you're trying too hard and you're pushing quantity instead of quality, and it just goes south very quickly. But again, when I talk about complacency, there's an exercise you should think of, which is, okay, well, we got all these inbound leads. Well, how many people are you missing? I think that a story that I think is pertinent here is at my last company, we would get these people who would Google for the type of solution that we did, which was mobile connectivity, and it was a really great solution. Companies who found us were like, thank God I found that this is even possible. And I kind of likened it to prospects who had walked across the desert, and they thought something may or may not be possible. They tried and couldn't find it, and finally an inbound lead came in, and it was a great conversation, and we helped the client out. But my immediate reaction is, well, how many people were in that same mode and just gave up? So, if you're not doing outbound and worry about inbound is, for all the people you're excited to talk to, are you missing 80% of the people out there who you should be talking to? And then likewise too is, how many people are your competitors catching first? If you're too concentrated on inbound, are your competitors catching people earlier in the buy cycle and catching them before possibly they would even come to your site and include you in the evaluation? So I'm not trying to be too hard on inbound right now, and I will make the declaration. I've been an outbound lead generation specialist for 10 years now, so don't let my background color these comments, because inbound is a very important game to lock down tight and have dialed in, but you just have to be eyes wide open about some of the concerns. So moving on to outbound. Positives are, in my mind, it is true demand generation. You're actually going out and you're discovering demand that inbound most likely or very likely wouldn't have fully discovered, for the comment in the reason I said before. You also can catch people early in the buy cycle. You're reaching out before they reach out. And I forget the exact percentage, but they say something like people have made, 70% of their research is done before they actually reach out to you to talk to you about your product. Someone correct me if I have that right or wrong, but the whole point is people do a lot of work to educate themselves before they actually stick their head out and make it to your site. So if you have a chance, because you can tell by their customer profile or their vertical or their company size or that whole group that these people are people I should reach out to because they might be interested in my product for a very good reason, you have the chance to catch them early on and then put your value proposition in front of them instead of waiting for them to come to you. It's also very scalable. If you all of a sudden, your CRO comes to the marketing department and says, my salespeople need a big push. I need 4 times as many leads by the end of the month. Outbound is the only way you would actually make that happen. So you have to have an infrastructure and resources in place to actually be effective in your job. So whether you're a marketer or a sales leader, be very effective in your job and not have goals missed because you don't have at least the constructs of an outbound plan in the works. And what I'll say is with outbound, even if you don't know what to do, the best part about it, a huge positive, is that there's plenty of help out there. There are research agencies and research groups like Topo or Serious Decisions. There are agencies who can actually help you with the plan and also bring partners in to help you get the leads. So you don't have to do it on your own. You don't have to go out and rent lists. You don't have to, hire 10 SDRs necessarily and have them start cold calling. It's all an infrastructure that is out there. If you need some help to talk to any of these groups, whether it's a advisory firm or an agency or a publisher, I'm happy to connect you with one that matches up well with your vertical or your function that you're shooting after as your ICP. My caveat there, of course, because you don't want to just shoot out the gate and say, oh, here's $500,000, get me leads, is if you plan to go this route, make sure that you have a plan that you're going to test and then scale or it could be disastrous. I can probably have a whole other show with all the the horrible decisions made about people who went out of the gate too quickly with agencies or lead gen budgets who just didn't test it, didn't get feedback from their salespeople, and just kind of too easily believed what was written on paper as what would happen. So test, and then repeat and rinse and scale. So the negatives of outbound, which I bet wouldn't surprise many people listening to this if they've been in this area before. I think generally people find it pushy or icky. Obviously, people complain about their email folders being full. They complain about they can't answer the phone anymore because people are just calling them off the hook. If you decide to go and have a strong outbound strategy, whether in marketing, sales, or both, it can be tough. I mean, it's a very nuanced thing. It's a high degree of difficulty to not just become one more company that is spraying and praying, as the industry likes to call it. So you have to be very meticulous, very focused. Again, you have to test and you have to consider all the pluses and minuses. But definitely, it takes a right group of people to get past this feeling that this is icky. I feel uncomfortable going out and quote unquote bugging people, which it's not. You're hopefully thoughtfully reaching out to try to talk to decision makers, to introduce them to your product, and to try to figure out how can we have a conversation from here now that you know that we exist. So there is a plan, but it's a big negative that people feel. Regulatory concerns. The biggest thing now is, especially in Europe with GDPR, Canada with Castle, CAN spam has been around forever, but I don't even know if that ever had an effect other than really scaring people in 2003. But regulation is going to get worse. Congress or whoever is going to implement GDPR-like regulations one day in the U.S., and it's going to greatly affect outbound efforts, possibly for the better in some cases, but it'll probably go too far. I'm not trying to make an opinion here, but you have to be aware, will my efforts to reach out to people cold all of a sudden change on a dime? So just be aware, or even worse, am I actually violating some regulatory rules that could get my company in trouble because I'm not doing it right? So think about that stuff. Couple things that I call done wrong. Done wrong, it can have negative effects on your brand. If you have tons of people cold calling, especially if you've hired them from the outside, it doesn't take much for that to come back poorly on your brand. Spamming, all sorts of stuff. I just had a conversation today where a B2B company hired a more consumer transactional company's CMO, and it was doing really low touch, like kind of couponish sort of things. I'm not going to even explain it, but it just didn't connect on a wavelength between what the brand wanted to exude to its type of customers. So you have to be careful when you're going out, even if you're making your numbers, what the people who aren't responding are feeling. Done wrong, it can have negative effects on the relationship of marketing and sales in your company. I don't know how much people think about this, but I'm sure a lot of people have been in this situation where if marketing comes up with an outbound campaign that actually doesn't have the quality to back up the quantity, sales will react poorly, violently. And it'll actually exacerbate things so badly that if you send 100 leads and many of them are crap, maybe there's 10 amazing deals in there. But I guarantee you that sales will not only give up, but then it'll have a further effect on the future campaigns that you try to convince them to be part of and to have a positive view on when you send leads their way. So if you're going to do an outbound campaign, or any campaign for that matter, just be cognizant of, is sales on the same page? And again, if you test it, if you declare that something's a test and something does go wrong, then at least I think it's small. You can kind of like hit the reset button. But if you just come out of the gates and all of a sudden they call a bunch of people who never answer, or they're no longer at the company, or you have bad data, it can really have some horrible effects on the internal chemistry of your sales and marketing groups. And finally, done wrong, it can squander resources, budgets, and really cause a snowball effect that sets your whole company back. If you're being given $100,000 and you found out you just completely squandered it on an outbound campaign that was not well thought out or just wasn't good from the get-go, well, maybe that could have done a great event, or maybe it could have done, some other content creation that, or building your site to be better for people coming in, or could have been used towards other resources. You just have to make sure, again, you don't set the precedent that the money you put towards these marketing source campaigns often are money poorly spent. So unfortunately, you're fighting a lot of history, and it does put people on the defensive. So again, avoid the done wrongs before you even leave the gate. It's very important to think those through. So there will be a much deeper drill down in future episodes about how to create that. But again, these are the concepts I want everybody to understand before they even take actions and apply resources. So, as always, a few exercises. I'd like everybody, if they're listening at this part, to assess your inbound and outbound current strategies. First, do you have one of each? Do you actually have an inbound and an outbound strategy for your marketing and sales teams? Most people will quickly know they at least have one. But then even, can you define that one really that well? So if you have one, are they actually defined? Is it actually documented? So if you hired 2 people tomorrow to be your new marketing coordinator for inbound marketing, or your new ISR for the sales team, do you actually have a documented process? So sometimes the absence of that actually points out that you really don't have a plan. You might think you have a plan, but if it's not something you could quickly articulate and show that there are measured results tied to it, then you probably don't. So remember, this exercise isn't to actually make the plans. It's more doing a mental checklist and analyzing the existence or absence of these important pieces before you go forward. So finally, final exercise, fairly assess if your processes are actually cutting it. So most people think they're getting more leads they can handle. I hear so many people like, the phone's always ringing. I can barely keep up with the ones that are coming in. So a good exercise actually is take a look at your competition. Look at the size of their company. And if they're bigger, they probably are capturing more demand than you. So don't settle. When you're considering if you have a good value proposition and you're looking at your time and your resources, but you're like, well, this company is clearly scaling faster than me, and I don't think they're as good as what I'm doing. Well, then they're doing something you're not, related to their inbound and their outbound marketing strategy and their sales strategy. So don't settle. Look at these critically, and then try to figure out, at the very least, what could I be doing better? Do I need more salespeople, or do I need to put some money into the budget, or do I need to fix my user experience on my site? Think of where your current process is not cutting it. So, this point again is central to this episode. Examine if you're being complacent, because it's about discovering demand. People are always talking about generating demand. You're discovering demand, and you possibly, if you're missing it, you think you're doing everything you're capable of doing. It's like a metaphor for fitness. A lot of people look when they hear a fitness instructor say what they've got to do and what they've got to invest in. I'm like, I don't have the time for that. I don't even think I'm even capable of that. And really, it's just that they're oftentimes, they fail to put together the plan, but they also fail to kind of have the mindset to go forward with actually fixing it. So if you do these exercises, please email me your thoughts. I'd be happy to give you my advice. That's another great way. If you're like, I think I have a problem, I just don't even know where to start, you can reach out to me. I can either give you advice, or again, there are a number of agencies, there are a number of consultants that I could put you in touch with, and they can help you through that exercise, and you can possibly work with them to get this plan started. Because ultimately, it nets positive. If you get this right, you really, by not settling, you're actually not missing the chance to have people who should be using your product use your product. And it is a little daunting, but there's most likely way more demand out there than you know, and you'll regret it if you don't grab it. And frankly, you'll be lucky if the only negative outcome is your regret. because oftentimes it's what has people miss their goals or have companies just fail, to reach proper velocity to grow. So thanks for listening. More episodes like this are to come before the holidays, and I really appreciate all your support. If you have other topics you want to hear about, of course, reach out to me, and I look forward to sharing my next episode with you. Cheers.